positive word. So today we're going to look at the second dynamic that determines what people hear regardless of what they say. So we're going to say some things, but what dynamic is in place that determines what people will hear after what we say. And we're going to title this message today, Even is Uneven. Even is uneven. And if you want to follow along with today's Bible app, you can follow along with all my notes. You can scan the QR code. It will take you to the Bible app. Or you can open the YouVersion Bible app, go to More, go to Events, and our notes will be there today. So if you're one of these people that want to read along with the notes and fact check me and make sure everything is going to plan, and maybe there's some people in here, not this location because we're brilliant here in Dublin, but maybe you're looking to see how long is left. Maybe, have you ever done that in the YouVersion Bible app? Oh, he's only halfway. So if you want to do that today, you can look and scan the QR code and it'll take you to all my notes today. But I want to start with a question, and it's this. How can different people say the same thing but have different outcomes? So how can different people say the same thing but have different outcomes? Imagine your friend said to you, "Hey, I'm so proud of you." You would take it as a compliment. "Hey, it's great that my friends really love me." But imagine your parents said, "I'm so proud of you." They said the same words, but when your parents said it, it's like the greatest achievement in the world, that you've made your parents proud. So they've said the same thing, these different people, so your friends or your parents said the same thing, but there was a different outcome. You sort of just brushed it off with your friends. It was like, cool, they like me. But if your parents said it, you'd be like, wow, that's amazing. It's my life achievement to make my parents proud. Or maybe your friend said, "Hey, you're always late." Anyone's friend saying that? Maybe they're not in the room yet because they're late. But, no shots fired. But, hey, maybe your friends have said, "Hey, you're late," and you're sort of like, it's fine. But if your boss says you're late, that is different. That's most likely a warning, and you need to take heed of that. But if your friend said, "Oh, you're making jokes, I need to get ready, I need to do this, it's the wife, it's this, it's that." But when your boss says it, that's a different story. So these different people have said the same thing, but there's a different outcome. And we're going to start today by looking at one of the most important relational dynamics that's overlooked. And maybe you've never thought about this before putting this message together. The more I think about this next statement, the more I'm like, I don't really think about this too often. So let me tell you what it is. So it's this. The relationship you have with others is rarely the same relationship they have with you. So let that sink in for a moment. The relationship you have with others is rarely the same relationship they have with you. And as I was putting this message together, I'm like, I don't think about this probably as often as I do. And maybe you don't understand it. Here's a few examples. So firstly, parents. If you're a parent or you were a child and you had parents or whatever that dynamic looks like, that relationship from a parent to a child, if you're a parent, you have a relationship with a child. But that child has a relationship with an adult. So it's a completely different dynamic. Yes, you have a relationship, but it's very different. They are the child, and you are the caregiver. You are the parent. And even keeping it in the family, siblings, you may think, oh, we're siblings, we're brother or we're sister. But there's a dynamic in play. Maybe you're the oldest, and you have to show the younger ones how to do it. Or maybe you're the younger one, and you can just get away with anything. Or you're the middle one, and you get blamed on what the youngest one and the oldest one do all the time. So there's a different dynamic even with siblings. And as we've mentioned, there's a dynamic with your boss or people that you work with. Maybe your boss and your pals and your friends. But if they say, "Hey, can you do this?" You have to listen. They're your boss. There's a different dynamic. So even though, yes, you can be friendly and yes, you can get on with each other, the relationship isn't the same. To them, you want them to be your friend. But for them, you're their employee. So when they ask you to do something, they do it. So in all these different scenarios, and in many more, whether it's a captain or whether it's a friend or whether it is, most of our relationships are different from the person that is opposite us. And in each part of the relationship, each person has equal value. So they have equal value, but unequal power, influence, and authority. So the parent and the child both have equal value, but the parent has more power, more influence, and more authority. The boss has more power, influence, and authority, but both people have equal value. So this dynamic, this relational reality should govern how we communicate and influence the words that we use, but it doesn't. So often we forget about that the person in front of us, the relationship we have with them isn't necessarily the relationship they have with us. So if we keep this in our brains, it should help us communicate with them, and it helps us choose the words that we use, but so often we forget about this dynamic in play. And we know the power of words. Words can leave a mark for good or for bad. And we know this. We've experienced good and we've experienced bad words used against us. Maybe someone has said to you in the past, I am so proud of you. Maybe it was that friend. Maybe it was a partner that you have. Maybe it was your parents. And words like this have shaped you today. That you walk differently. That you're confident in yourself because you know that you've made someone proud. Some of these words build us up. Or maybe words like, you've embarrassed me tonight. Maybe words like that hurt you. All depending on who it's from. If a friend tells you that, it's like, it's fine, you'll get over it. But imagine your spouse said that, hey, you really embarrassed me tonight. It's like, I really hurt them. I did something to them. Or maybe someone has said in the past, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Maybe you had a recital, a football match, something that you were performing in, and someone in your life said, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And in that moment, you've never felt more loved in your life. Or maybe some of us in here have heard these words, you're not needed here anymore. I remember when I was 16 and working in a Chinese restaurant. I was working for like 6 months and then I was getting paid, and all of a sudden she said these words, you're not needed here anymore. I'll not see you again next week. And then she accidentally texted me during the week to give me hours, and I got 2 more months out of it. And then again, she says, you're not needed here anymore. And maybe those phrases have resonated with you. Maybe you've heard those before. And maybe it's bringing up past hurt, or maybe it's bringing up past celebration that you're like, I've remembered the moment my parents said, I'm proud of you. Or that person said, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Hey, and we know this to be true. Our lives have been shaped by words spoken to, over, about, and at us. This is what makes us who we are today. The words that were spoken to you, the words spoken over you, the words spoken about you, and the words spoken at you. When you look at yourself in the mirror, this is what is a result of. How you feel, how you look at yourself, how you conduct yourself is all because of the words that people have spoken to, over, about, and at us. And we know the power of people's words to us. We know that they can hurt us, but they can build us up. And we think about these words. But what we tend to forget about, what we tend to forget to recognize, and we forget to take responsibility for, are our words. We can recognize it in other people. Hey, they need to be nice to me. They need to be caring to me. The people need to take responsibility for their words. But so often we forget to recognize and take responsibility for the words that we say. The words that we speak to people. The words that we speak over people. And if you're a Christ follower in here, the stakes are even higher. Like, this isn't an option for us. Paul in the Bible calls us as Christ followers one another people. What does it mean to be one another people? In the Bible, it tells us to love one another, accept one another, encourage one another, honor one another, forgive one another. So as Christ followers, this is our standard. We need to recognize and take responsibility for our words because we are held to this standard. To love, to accept, to encourage, honor and forgive one another. So the stakes are a lot higher. And hey, if you're not a Christ follower in this place, maybe you've said this before, if only the Christians I knew were like that. Hey, have you ever met a Christian who was mean and rude and argumentative and not very nice to be around? Hey, we can all be like that at times. We go through life, we have difficulties, we know what it's like to do that. But hey, if you're a Christ follower and you said, if only the Christians I knew loved one another, accepted one another, cared for one another. Sometimes as Christians, people know us for what we're against and not what we're for. But we want you to know today, if you have no faith, if you've stepped into the room for the first time, we are for you. We are for Jesus, and we are for you to discover your extraordinary purpose in Christ. So I want you to know today, we are for you. So I'm sorry if you've encountered a Christian who is not like that. But hey, today we're looking at three dynamics that determine what people hear regardless of what we say. So we say a lot of things, but how do people hear it? So as we say things, we need to take into account these three dynamics that determine what people hear. So the first dynamic we looked at last week is words are not equally weighted. And we talked about it, that negative words weigh more than positive words. So we need to use our words affirming, encouraging, building others up, especially if you're a Christ follower. But today's dynamic, the dynamic number 2, is this: that source determines weight. Source determines weight. And we've already asked the question, so how can different people say the same thing but have different outcomes? So we've asked that. So how does the source determine the weight of our words? We see this maybe dynamic in play against our friends and against our daughters. So imagine you're going to a coffee shop, meeting up with a friend, and your friend turns to you and says, "Girl, you are looking great." You feel good about yourself. It's like, thanks very much for the compliment. But imagine you go home and your daughter, out of the blue, says, "Mom, you are beautiful." It's not a difference between this place. It's not because it's a coffee shop or at home, but it's the source that it comes from. Your daughter has said, "You are beautiful." What a compliment. Or maybe today, after service, when I'm sitting out in the foyer, or Navan and Dundalk are going to text me and say, "Hey, great message today. It was fantastic. It was the best one I've heard all week." And I'm going to get loads of texts. I know I am, from Navan and Dundalk, and people here are going to compliment me. I know, it's okay. I know. And it's a compliment, and it's great, thank you very much. And I will feel encouraged. But if my wife says, "Great job, you were fantastic," this is going to weigh more than what other people say. Why? Because my wife has heard most of my messages, and even the bad ones. So when she says, "Hey babe, that was amazing," I'm gonna take that on. And we see this dynamic in play because source determines weight, weight determines impact, and impact determines outcome. So the source, my wife, determines the weight of her words. So I'm going to listen to what my wife says. And if you ask her, I listen to every word that she says. I'm brilliant. And the weight of her words determines the impact. So if she says, "Hey, here's some feedback," well, I'm going to listen because the weight of her words determines the impact it's going to be. But if someone that I've never met says, "Hey, I've got some feedback for you. Could have done this better," I'm going to, yeah, okay. Forget about it. But if my wife says that she's got weight which leads to impact, and her impact determines the outcome. So maybe she says, "Hey, you should welcome in this way," or "You should be a little bit quieter," or "You should do this, you should do that." Because of the source determines the weight. The weight of her words determines the impact. The impact determines the outcome. So I will change because of the source. And we've seen this played out in our life, how the source determines the weight. Years ago, when I was younger, I had some extra pocket money, and I like to consider myself generous. So I had a little bit of extra money, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to bless my mother, because I love my mom, and she is the best mom in the world. So I thought, you know what? I was working in Tesco at the time, and I had some extra money, so I thought, okay, I'm going to buy her some flowers and buy her some sweets. And I take after my mum because I love sweets. See, chewy sweets, I just love sweets. And if you've been here before, I've been handed a Starbucks while I'm preaching. I've been handed a McDonald's while I'm preaching. I love sweets. Any moment now. So I know my mom loves sweets. That's where I get it from. So I thought, I'm going to give her sweets. I'm going to give her flowers. So I get home. I'm going to give her it. But before I give her the sweets, I get a Post-it note and write, to the best mom in the world, love, Matthew, XO. You have to kiss and hug your mother because she deserves it. So I wrote this. Didn't think anything of it. The flowers didn't survive the week. The sweets didn't survive the evening. But that Post-it note that I wrote to the best mum in the world stayed on the wall beside her bed for years. And I'm like, it's a stupid Post-it note. The corners are bent. The handwriting's not good. But it stayed for years. Why? Because the source determines the weight. The source determines the weight. Because I told my mom, which is true, that she is the best mom in the world, it determines the weight. Because I am her favorite child. Or at least I'm her favorite eldest son that she has. So the source determines the weight. And as a father, it just naturally happens that your words, the source of you being a father, actually weigh more than anyone else. And it's a dynamic we can't change, and that's why we love all the fathers in Lighthouse. And we can't wait to celebrate you on Father's Day in a few months. But hey, what is the takeaway? What does this all mean? We need to remember this. So remember who you are and what you represent to the person on the other side of you. It's something that we tend to forget, that we need to remember who we are, so the source, and what we represent to the person on the other side of us. So I am my mother's son, and I represent her blood, sweat, and many, many tears. So because of that, that's why my words were so weighty. And you need to remember that who you are, whether you're a boss, a father, a mother, a friend, an older sibling, and what you represent. And as Christ followers, we represent Jesus. Maybe you're representing your company. You know what it's like to have a professional conversation. You go in, your words are not your own. You represent your company. You're speaking on behalf of them. So when you have a professional conversation, I'm not just speaking on behalf of Matthew, but if I said something in a professional setting, I'm speaking on part of Lighthouse as well. So these aren't just my words. So if I said something controversial, you wouldn't maybe say Matthew said, you would probably say Lighthouse said, because I represent Lighthouse. So we need to remember who we are, what we represent to the person on the other side of us. And the challenge of this is we need to leverage our weighty words to inspire, encourage, direct, and protect. We need to know sometimes how weighty our words are. Because my title now is location pastor, I know that my words weigh heavier than they used to because I've got a title. And maybe your title has caused your words to be weightier. Or maybe you have influence, so your words have weight. But we need to use these words to inspire, to encourage, to direct, and to protect. We can't use our words by demanding sweets from people when you're preaching. That would be using your words unwisely. But we need to leverage our words to inspire, encourage, direct, and protect. And again, we know this dynamic in children and in parents. It's the easiest one to sort of use as a dynamic because one is a child and one is an adult. So there's a massive difference between the relationship there. So as a parent, sometimes we need to tell our children off. So we go in and what we see in front of us is someone who needs to know better. We need to teach them a lesson. We need to grow them and mature them. So we see that's the dynamic we see. We have a relationship with them so I can talk to them and I can tell them exactly what they need to do. But when they look back at you, they see someone that they get their identity from. They're looking at someone who they need affirmation from. So that the relationship that you have is different. They're looking at someone who affirms them. They are inspired to be. But you're looking at someone that you need to correct and bring into maturity. So how can that bring our words to a different place? How can we create a place where we look at our children and it's like, yes, we have a relationship, but it doesn't mean I can say any words I want. Because the words that I'm using in this message, the adults in all 3 locations, aren't going to be the words that I use if I was doing this message in kids' church. I would use different language. Why? Because I recognize the relationship I have with them because they're younger. So it leads us to this takeaway of remembering who you are and what you represent to the person on the other side of you. So who are you? Are you an employee, a boss, a friend? What do you represent in that moment to the person on the other side of you? And as Christ followers, that's who we are. But we're commanded to leverage our words for the sake of others. This is for other people. We're one another people. And last week we looked at this passage from Ephesians 4:29. It says, don't let any unwholesome, rude, mean, unhealthy words come out of your mouths, but only words that are good, for building others up according to their needs so that it may benefit those who listen. Hey, we need to build others up. Every conversation that we have is a construction site. Every conversation is a construction site. Why? Because we should be able to build others up. Use good words. Use encouraging words. Use words that will build people up. And if you're a Christ follower, we're told to build people up. And there's a twist on this application because we need to remember who we are, but also who you represent. Not what you represent, but who you represent, because we represent Jesus. We represent God to other people. So our passage today is found in Matthew 5:13-36. And this is named after a fella called Matthew, who's a tax collector. And Jesus said, hey, follow me. And he went and followed and wrote down everything that Jesus said and did. And now we have this book called Matthew. And in chapter 5, Jesus is talking, and it's called the Sermon on the Mount. This is his most important, his most famous message, and it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And he starts this sermon off with something called the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes simply mean blessed are. So he goes on to name characteristics of a Christ follower. Blessed are X, Y, and Z. And he goes on to explain the characteristics of a Christ follower. Because you may be in here thinking, if I'm going to be a Christ follower, it's just rules. I have to do this, I have to do that. It's just conduct. It's just you have to do this and you have to do that. It's a set of rules and regulations. But actually, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, looks at the characteristics of a Christ follower. And we know this to be true, that conduct flows out of character. So God is interested in our character. So when we're life-giving, when we're encouraging, when we're loving, our words, our conduct will be life-giving, will be honoring, and will be encouraging. So we look at this, and God is looking at our character, and we know that conduct flows from our character. So we read this in Matthew 5, verse 13, and it says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. We read last week, and we read it there in Ephesians, that our words should be used for good, for the benefit of others, but sometimes our words are no longer good. Hey, and does anyone else feel encouraged that Jesus has said, you are the salt of the earth? Doesn't really feel like something that you would say to encourage someone. But hey, if you're in Navan and you're trying to flirt with someone, use this line and tell us how it goes. Just approach someone and say, hey, you are the salt of the earth. And just let us know how that goes for you. But what does this mean? Like, Jesus is saying, hey, you're the salt of the earth. Should I be encouraged? Should I be challenged? What does it mean to be the salt of the earth? And salt does two things. It preserves and it protects. And we're called to do that for others. We're called to preserve and to protect other people with our words. What words do you use? Do you protect people with your words, or do you bring people down? R.T. France, who's a New Testament scholar, says disciples, if they are true to their calling, they make the earth a purer and more palatable place. That's what salt does. It makes it more pure and it makes it more palatable. Imagine your workplace. Imagine if we used our words positively. If we were the salt of the earth, imagine our workplaces, our families, our sports groups. It would be a more palatable place to be if we use our words to be the salt of the earth, to preserve, to protect, to make it a more pure and palatable place. But hey, what good are your words doing? It said, hey, if you lose all your saltiness, your words are no longer good. Maybe for so long you haven't been using your words correctly, and you just talk for the sake of talking, and you're rude, and you discourage, and now people don't listen to you because they feel like they know what's going to come out of your mouth. And you feel like your words are no longer good. They have no impact anymore. Because we know this to be true, that source determines weight, weight determines impact, and impact determines outcome. Hey, if no one's listening to you, if no one is impacted by your words, then you have no weight. And why is that? Because of the source. Maybe you've been using your words wrong. Maybe this is a challenge to, hey, be more encouraging today. Be the salt of the earth. And Matthew goes on to say this in verse 14. He says, you are the light of the world. Okay, this sounds a little bit more encouraging than being the salt of the earth. So anyone in Dundalk, if you're trying to flirt with someone, use this term. You are the light of the world. You might fare a little bit better than Navan do, calling people salt of the earth. But let us know how it goes, calling people the light of the world. So Jesus says we are the light of the world. What does that mean? With light comes life, comes hope, comes all these things that when we think of light, what do we think of? We think of words like hope and life and light. So that is what Jesus is calling us to do, to be life-giving, to be full of joy, to be full of hope for other people. Francis of Assisi, who's a Franciscan monk, said this: all the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of a single candle. So all the darkness on one single candle, yet the darkness cannot overcome it. So what does this mean for us? That this tiny light that we may have, our words are powerful. When we use this light, when we use words for good, nothing can overcome the power of our words. So hey, I want you to know today, our words have weight. And we've been given this gift of life and light. We've been given the gift of using words to build people up. But he hammers home this idea in verse 16. He says, then let your light shine before others. So we've been given the gift of light and life through our words. But he says, hey, use it. Shine your light. Use that life. Use that light in everywhere that you go. So we're called to be the salt, and we're called to be the light. And they're two very different things, because the salt, what does salt do? You sprinkle it over and it gets into it. It gets into the fabric of whatever it is that's in it. So our words, we should be in the world. We're told to be in the world, but not of the world as Christ followers. So we should be in the nitty-gritty, be around people, be using our words every day, normal things. Talking to individuals, talking to the person beside you, making it personal, up and close. But light, you can see light from far off. So we need to go public with it as well. So the words that we use aren't just to build people up, hey, then to the person beside you, but actually we should go big with it. And if you're a Christ follower, so often, maybe we're good at this, to have one-on-one conversations. Hey, I'm a Christ follower. Hey, I go to church. But I'd say, are you bold and brave with your faith? Are you bold and brave with the words that you say? Are you confident with the gospel, the good news, telling other people about Him? So we're supposed to be salt and light. This salt, this idea of small and in relationship and up close, but actually light as well. We should be bold with our faith. And baptism is a perfect example of that, being bold and out there with our faith. But how do we do that? How do we be salt and light? How do we be personable? And how do we also share our faith in a bold way? Bob Goff, who's an American lawyer and author, says this: we can be the light of the world without leaving our full beams on and annoying everybody. How annoying is, I was driving home last night from youth, and there was someone just driving with full beam on, and you try and flash, so hey, your full beam's on, and they don't care. They just keep driving on. We know how annoying it is to have our full beams on, but hey, Did you know, Christ followers, we can be the light of the world without annoying everyone? Did you know that? Have we got any annoying Christians in Navan or Dundalk? I think there may be a few here in Dublin. I can't see anyone's faces, so I'm not looking anywhere in particular. But hey, I don't know if you know this, Christ follower. We don't need to be weird. We don't need to be weird. Maybe you've been in a place where you're having a normal conversation. Maybe you're talking about the sport from the weekend. And then there's that weird Christ follower who just says something and just makes everything weird. Maybe you've been in a situation like that and they've just been weird. But hey, do you know you can be life-giving without being embarrassing? Do you know you can be encouraging without being weird? Do you know you can be normal and still be encouraging to other people? We do not need to be weird. And maybe you know some weird Christians. They are everywhere. We can be weird sometimes. Maybe you think that I'm weird standing up here. Maybe you think the band are weird. Why are they singing songs to God? Maybe you think people that serve in church or go to church are just plain weird anyway. But you can think that we're weird, but hopefully that you know also that we're encouraging and life-giving and loving. But you don't need to be weird today. So Christ followers, write it down, circle it. I didn't have enough room to put too many explanation points. But do not be weird. Turn to the person beside you and say, you don't have to be weird. We can have normal conversations about our faith with people. And how do we do that? All we need to do is be intentional. Be intentional with the moment. Be intentional with our words. Be intentional with the relationships that we have. Imagine the influence of the church if this was our story. If we weren't weird. If we weren't discouraged. And if we weren't known for what we were against. And if you're here and maybe you did have faith. Maybe you've been hurt by church, or maybe you've just known a Christ follower who wasn't nice, who wasn't encouraging, who you just feel were against everything. We want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we didn't represent Christ as well as we should have. But my prayer for you today is that you look past us and see Jesus. Because Jesus is perfect, Jesus is loving, Jesus is caring. So even when we fail, even when we can't do it, we have a God who is on our side and He loves you and cares for you. But if we keep doing this as Christ followers, we lose the right to be heard. If we're always discouraged and if we're always against people, if we're always weird, we lose the right to be heard. And Paul puts it this way, if our words aren't filled with love, if our words aren't like that of Christ, we sound like a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I'm a drummer. Shout out to all the drummers. Pastor Sam, Pastor Rebecca, drummers as well. We love them too. So we have to be a pastor in Lighthouse, apparently you need to be able to play drums. So, who loves to hear a cymbal solo? I'm a drummer. I don't want to hear that. And I don't need to go over to your drums, and someone in your location doesn't need to go over your drums to remind you how annoying it is to just hear a cymbal again and again and again and again. But hey, at the end of our services, we have the piano come up, and we can listen to the piano for ages, or we can listen to a guitar solo forever. But if the cymbal is played more than twice, you're like, nah, stop, forget about it. Or maybe you've seen these advertised. They're concerts that are based on candlelight, and there's just a piano or something, and you can listen to it all night. But no one's going to a drum show to listen to cymbals because it's just an irritating noise. And can I take 30 seconds of your time to tell you and teach you why the piano comes up? Maybe you think, oh, they're trying to manipulate us. They're trying to make whoever's preaching sound good. And yes, it does make me sound a little bit better. I agree. But why do we have the piano come up? Well, we're obviously not going to bring the drums up because we all know that no one likes the sound of the drums. But hey, in the Bible, it tells us that our war is not against flesh and blood, but against the darkness of this world. So right now, we're in a battle. There's a battle for your life. You may be in here just thinking you're coming to church, but there's a battle going on right now. The Holy Spirit, God wants to know you today. But the devil is trying to fight. The words that we've sang, the words that I'm saying, are maybe getting into your heart, and the devil's saying it's lies. The devil's saying that's not true. Darkness is trying to get rid of all those. And in the Bible, there's a story, and we've looked at David over the past few weeks. And the King Saul had issues with his head, and the darkness was fighting against him. And David, it said, he played worship to the king. And we believe worship is powerful. When we sing praises to God and declare who He is, there is a power in worship. There's a power that you can use each and every day for worship. So in this moment, when we bring the piano up, we want to create an atmosphere of worship. Why? Because our worship defeats the darkness. So right now, as you're listening, and maybe you're taking it all in, there's a fight for your life. And we believe that when we play worship, when the Holy Spirit is in the room, that we believe it helps us focus, it helps us align ourselves to what God is saying in this moment. So if you ever wondered, why are they playing the piano in the background? It's because we believe worship is powerful. There is a fight for your life, and the fight for your life is worth it. Because you're loved, you're cared for, we love you. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. So we will do anything, whatever it takes, for you to discover your extraordinary purpose and to come to know the Holy Spirit. So that is why we play the piano at the end of our service. And we can listen to it for a while. But to get back to our point, that we are likened to a cymbal or a gong when our words aren't full of love. You can take it once or twice, but then it's like, I don't want to hear it anymore. And we need to remember this dynamic, that remember who you are and what you represent to the person on the other side of you. Or as Christ followers, remember who you are and who you represent to the person on the other side of you. Because we see this outplayed, that source determines weight, weight determines impact, and impact determines outcome. So the question I want to leave us with is, what outcome do you want with your words? What outcome do you want with your words? And there's three simple ways. Firstly, look at the source. Look at yourself. Look at your character. If you're a Christ follower, is it in line with the Beatitudes? Is it in line with being a one another person? If you are not a Christ follower, you don't have to live up to God's standard because you don't want anything to do with Him. But hey, you can still be kind. You can still be a generous person. You can still be an encouraging person without the standard of being a one another person, to be full of love and care for other people. So hey, look at the source. You can still be a kind individual without Christ. But as Christ followers, the stakes are higher. We're called to love one another, care for one another, accept one another. So how do we see the impact of our words? We look at the source. Look at us. And today you can accept Jesus into your life. Today is the day that you can say, hey, God says these things about me. I'm the salt of the earth. I'm the light of the world. I'm loved, cared for, chosen. God says that about me. God says that about you today as well. He's a plan and purpose for your life. So firstly, we look at the source. The second thing we do is ask ourselves, where are we throwing our weight? Where are the weight of our words going? Are we throwing our weight towards negativity? Are we cynical? Is there always something to complain about? Sometimes as Irish people, oh, look at the weather. I'll be summer soon. I'll get better one day. And we're always negative. We've got this tall poppy syndrome. Oh, didn't they do great? It was all right. It was grand. Like we throw our weight sometimes more towards negativity. But hey, where are you throwing your weight towards? Are you throwing it towards positive words that build people up? And the third thing is, what impact are your words having? Are they having any impact at all? If people stop listening to you, do people describe you as that negative Nelly so they don't want to hear what you have to say? Or do your words hold impact? When you say something, people listen. Why? Because you've been there for them. You're encouraging. Maybe you have a relationship with them. So hey, what would your life look like if you took into consideration the source of your words? And remembered who you are and who you represent to the person on the other side of you? How much better would our conversations, our relationships be if we remembered who we are, who we represent, and considered the person opposite us?